I chose for us to read The Last Day of Summer by Lamar Giles because he uses figurative language in a really good way. The illustrations support the text, and the precise language is everywhere to help us better understand the book. As far as the illustrations go, they help define the characters by the facial expressions that we see, as well as the body language. Together, they reinforce the text to help us understand and get a feeling or a mood for the reading. The figurative language helps us engage in what is going on in the book. It helps us to see the interactions between the environment and the characters and everything that's happening in the book. And the precise language also goes along with that, as together they help us to form and visualize like visions and ideas of what is happening in the book with imagery and what's going on. Overall, I think this book is going to be a really fun read for us, and I can't wait to dig in. Chapter 12, Maneuver 38. There were side doors in the library, and they became clogged with everyone attempting to squeeze through. Mr. Flux seemed unconcerned with the fleeing clock watchers. He was tugging the time suck's hair the way a cowboy tugs the reins of a horse, directing the beast toward one particular clock watcher. Father Time. The bearded man became wide-eyed with fear. Tucking his sacred yearbook into his robes, he ran first left, then right, as if he couldn't decide which frightened crowd he wanted to join. Mr. Flux grinned, his mouth packed with too many teeth, like the big bad wolf. He skulked the beast closer to Father Time. "We have to help him," said Sheed. Otto said, "How?" A coiled length of rope was still looped over Sheed's shoulder. Chapter 12. He shrugged it off and passed one end to Otto, pointing it at a support column near their hiding place. He pointed again, that time to another support column across the room. Otto understood. She'd wanted to use the rope to trip the beast. Acting quickly, Otto tied the rope low around the nearest support column with his best knot. Tying the other end would be more troublesome. Mr. Flux would see them, unless... "AM, PM," Otto whispered. The golden hours appeared at his side, almost out of thin air, their light speed making them faster than the eye could see, which was exactly what they needed. She'd said, "Can you two get this rope tied around that pole way over there, without the man on the time suck seeing you?" The golden hours nodded. "Of course." Otto said, "Wait until he's moving, at the last possible second, okay?" "Certainly." Mr. Flux did not rush. Being the meanie that he was, he moved slowly, getting great pleasure from Father Time's fear. The old clock watcher shook like a freezing chicken beneath his flapping robe. "You thought these books were going to help you, old man?" said Mr. Flux. "That I'd sit back and let you ruin my opportunity?" "There's wisdom in these pages." Father Time's voice was as shaky as his body. "Why are you terrorizing us? Why are you upsetting the natural order of things?" "Perhaps the natural order of things upset me first." Mr. Flux dug his heels into the time suck's sides, spurring it forward. Otto and Sheed said, "Now!" AM and PM vanished, and then the rope snapped tightly across the library floor, anchored to the far post, where the golden hours gave Otto and Sheed a thumbs up. Neither Mr. Flux nor the beast saw the fresh trap, and the creature's legs tangled, snagged by the line. It tipped forward, its snout dipping between its own feet until it was an uncontrolled roll that hurled Mr. Flux across the room. While he flew, Father Time stepped out of the sliding beast's path, and it collided with the far wall, destroying it as it burst out, then down, since the library was on the school's top floor. The beast took lots of debris with it, from single bricks to whole chunks of a building that looked like big old puzzle pieces. Before the pieces refroze, paused in midair, a brick and concrete avalanche trail looked in time all the way to the ground. The tough time sock recovered from the fall quickly, though was a bit wobbly on those thick legs. Free of Mr. Flux, it proceeded to graze in the nearby field. Otto wondered if they should follow its lead and make their escape. Mr. Flux was laid out on a toppled non-fiction shelf. His stretchy arms and legs rested limply on dislodged volumes. She'd yanked the knot loose from the pass. Now! Otto ran to undo the other end so they could bind the rubbery menace and get some answers. Mr. Flux groaned, still stunned from impact. Other clock watchers peeked from under tables and behind chairs and from other hiding places. Anticipation buzzed through the room. The cousins tugged the rope tight between them, prepared to pounce. 1, mouthed Otto. 2, mouthed Sheed. 3, shouted Mr. Flux, his eyes popping open like window shades. The boys screamed, the clock watchers screamed, Mr. Flux screamed, but his scream was threaded with laughter. Bullies loved terrorizing those around them. Mr. Flux's bent knees straightened, lifting the rest of his body to a standing position in a way no normal human could ever manage. Upright, he reached for his discarded hat, which lay at his feet. His arm bubblegum stretched. Once the brim was pinched between his thumb and forefinger, the arm retracted like fishing line on a reel. He placed the hat on his head, taking his time to adjust the fit. As he did, more clock watchers fled the room. Otto and Sheed exchanged terrified glances, but would not run. Without saying another word, they executed Maneuver 21, stand your ground. They worked too hard to get a lead on Mr. Flux to simply turn tail. That was not what legends did. Well, aren't you the brave ones? Mr. Flux chortled. Sheed said, you're going to help us fix time. I already did. You wanted more summer? Now you have all you can ever stand. You tricked us, Otto said. You're a dirty trickster. Now, all that name-calling is beneath you. Mr. Flux took a step closer, almost in range for some rope wrangling. Well, you're saying nasty things to me. You could be enjoying all the time you have left. What's that supposed to mean? Said Sheed. Oh, said Mr. Flux, I like you two so much. I'm thinking I don't want to ever see you change. Another picture may be in order to preserve you just the way you are. His hand snapped forward like a frog's tongue snatching a passing fly, grasping for the camera still dangling from Otto's neck. His fingers folded around it like spider legs as he attempted to rip it from Otto. The canvas and leather strap around Otto's neck held strong, and Otto backpedaled while Sheed rushed forward, still gripping his length of rope. Sheed, using the natural athleticism his gangly legs allowed, circled Mr. Flux twice, looping the rope around his calves. Hey, stop that, Mr. Flux said, distracted. While Sheed drew his attention, Otto slipped free of Flux's grip. With his part of the rope, he ran around Mr. Flux in the opposite direction, doubling the loops around his legs. Sheed snapped his section of rope like a whip, and it lassoed Mr. Flux's left arm. Otto performed a similar move on the other side, snagging the right arm. Maneuver 38, rope wrangling. The boys moved like a couple of dancers in a well-rehearsed routine until most of their rope wound around Mr. Flux, mummy style. Otto wrapped his remaining length around Flux's hands and leaned back, drawing the rope tight. Sheed did the same on Mr. Flux's other side, so they both looked like contestants in a game of tug-of-war, where Mr. Flux was the bowed ribbon at the center of the rope. We've got you, said Otto, triumphant and straining. Now, if you answer our questions and help us fix time, we might let you go back to where you came from. Sheed said, Otto, stop trash talking and let's get this rope tied to something. Otto tugged on his rope extra hard. We won. He's not going anywhere. Mr. Flux, sad-faced and defeated, said, "He's right, you know." "See," said Otto, in his boastful Otto way. The entangled Flux said, "I'm not going anywhere." In a sudden burst of movement and strength, Mr. Flux spun on his heels. Otto and Sheed were yanked off their feet, colliding with one another. As they bounced off each other, they lost their grips on the rope, and it was sucked into the Mr. Flux cyclone, which spun in such a blur he was more like wind than man. When he slowed and settled, his limbs were free again, and the rope was thrown aside. He snatched the hat from his head, tipped it toward the boys, and bowed like a showman thanking his audience. Ta-da! Grinning a malicious grin, he straightened and replaced the hat atop his head. "Now, boys, for my next trick, I'm going to make 2 little problems disappear." He leapt forward, his fingers curled into claws, grasping for Otto's neck. Chapter 13, The Unluckiest Chapter. Sheed grabbed Otto by the shoulder and rolled him away from Mr. Flux's grasp. With some distance between him and them, the boys scrambled on their feet, on guard. "Give me that camera," Mr. Flux spat. Otto and Sheed exchanged glances, a silent message, and then bolted for the door. Sheed's speed was a natural gift, one he hoped to use as a fly flamingo someday. Otto was less athletic, though he kept up when it mattered, like now. Neither boy was faster than Mr. Flux, who moved like snakes and living taffy and malignant rubber bands, slender and stretched. He jetted forward like an eel through water, bending his body around them and positioning his torso between them and the exit while his legs ran to catch up. At the bottom of our page here, we have our first vocabulary word, malignant. Can you say that with me? Malignant. Yeah, good job. So, here it says, Mr. Flux, who moved like snakes and living taffy, and malignant rubber bands, slender and stretched. We know that malignant also means malevolent or evil. And here, Mr. Flux is the bad guy, and so that means that the rubber bands, or his arms that look like rubber bands, which is our figurative language, is malignant, which means they're evil and they're scary, they're evil and they're bad. His elongated body snapped back to normal human shape. "No way out, boys." Otto looked about this way and that, refusing to give up, because giving up was something else legends didn't do. Mr. Flux was wrong. There was a way out. It just might not be the safest or smartest route. "Sheed, follow me." Otto ran for a hole in the wall. There was no time to discuss this, and Sheed knew that, the same way he instantly knew what Otto intended they do. "Like a jungle gym," Otto shouted over his shoulder, the only instruction he had time to give before leaping through the ragged hole in the wall. They were 3 floors up. Airborne for a moment, Otto stretched, grabbing at a frozen brick that had been dislodged, then restuck in time when the time suck crashed through the wall. He caught it in a good, solid, life-saving grip. Then it unfroze. He expected this, knowing he had but a second before his touch permanently unstuck the debris. So he swung to the next lower piece of frozen brick, grabbed it, then swung to the next as each previous piece thumped to the ground. Swing, grab, swing, grab, swing, grab, like a jungle gym. When he descended the 3 floors, piece by piece, in clumsy grasping hand grips, Sheed traversed the debris, nimble as always. He leapt from brick to brick on his tiptoes as if skipping across the stepping stones that fell away a moment after he touched them. His pace was fast and sure, and he reached the ground before Otto, turning his last bouncing step into a somersault and landing in a superhero crouch. Otto released his last handhold, landed beside Sheed and said, "Show off?" Sheed shushed him with a hand wave. The time suck that created their escape route lumbered toward them, brushing chunks of frozen brick wall aside. This close, it was clear This particular time suck wasn't as large as the one that had frightened them at Mr. Archie's store. If that other one was the size of a full-grown elephant platypus thing, this one was more like a kid elephant platypus thing. Extra large or not, it was still capable of doing a lot of damage. Just guess the wall hovering around them in pieces. Freeze again? She'd whispered. No, that wouldn't work. The creature had already seen them in motion. Wouldn't be fooled. Otto said, I think we need to move slowly. They landed mere yards from where they'd laid their bikes, so it was only a matter of shuffling slowly to them. No problem, so long as the creature didn't eat them. Brave. She'd move first. He did a slow lunge toward his bike, planting one foot, then sliding the other to meet it. The time suck angled its snout his way and took a slow step closer, too. She took another step toward his bike, and the beast took another step toward him, almost close enough to touch. Otto began his slide, wanting to be nearer to Sheed in case this turned into a fight. Sheed stopped moving, but the beast took a bouncy step forward and poked its snout right in his face, stopping short just inches. The remaining distance it covered with a flicked tongue mopped sloppily across Sheed's cheek. Oh, gross, Sheed moaned. First tentacles, now this. Otto panicked, his heart plummeting to the ground with the loose bricks he dragged down. He stood at an angle that only allowed sight of the beast's action, not the result. Are you okay? Did it lick your face off? Sheed twisted his way, revealing an intact, yet moist cheek. I'm covered in giant monster spit, Otto. I'm not okay. The beast chuffed, gusting hot breath that rippled Sheed's teeny fro. It angled toward Otto. Oh, no, you don't. Otto mounted his bike. The creature did not pursue its next intended lick victim, eyeing the bike with the suspicion of a dog seeing its first cat. Otto told it, I ain't gonna hurt you. You ain't gonna lick me either, though. While he laid out those simple rules for the time suck, Sheed gathered his bike and sponged spit off his face with his b-ball jersey. Grandma's not going to let you keep that thing, you know. I wasn't thinking about going to keep it, Otto lied. He was. It was cute. Clearly, it wasn't a vicious creature, for it would have attacked him by now. It only had acted out because of Mr. Flux, Otto reasoned. Mr. Flux made you do things you didn't want to do. He knew that firsthand. Here, in the middle of page 93, we have our second vocabulary word, which is chuffed. It says, the beast chuffed, gusting hot breath that rippled Sheed's teeny fro. Now, at first glance, when you read this, you may think that chuffed means to breathe, right? Well, actually, chuffed means pleased, or thankful, or, like you're just pleased, and you're okay with it, and you're happy with the result. And in this situation, the beast is chuffed, so that means that the beast is happy, and he's pleased, and he's not mad or anything, he's pleased. So that's chuffed. Sheed said, we should go before Flux gets down here. If he's taking the stairs, we've only got a little head start. Mr. Flux did not take the stairs. A black streak ejected from the hole in the wall above their heads, dropping directly on the time suck's back. He gripped handfuls of its fur and dug his heels, riling the docile creature into a rage. Boys, Mr. Flux said, shall we continue? Here we have our last vocabulary word on page 94, which is docile. The sentence reads, he gripped handfuls of its fur and dug in his heels, riling the docile creature into rage. Now, when we first read that, we may think that the docile creature means like angry or something different. What do you guys think? Where docile really means easily trained or teachable. So that means that the creature was taught, or he listens to Mr. Flux because he's docile. So that's our last word, docile. Alrighty, if you enjoyed what we just read, and if you love sci-fi, young adult fiction, fantasy, time travel, all the things in that category and alike, this book has all of that and does a very, very good job. So if you are interested and want to continue reading, you can talk to me or you can just reach out and we can set up reading dialogue and a plan to continue reading this together.